our talk today on Romans chapter 13, and we're going to finish Romans chapter 13. And we're going to do verses 8 to 14. Romans chapter 13, verses 8 to 14. And last week we did Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 7. And this is where we talked about government or those who are in authority. And the scriptures are clear as far as Romans chapter 13, verses 1 to 8. And remember, this is coming from Romans 12. Remember, there's no chapter divisions. So essentially, Paul concludes and he ends the chapter of chapter 12, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with what? Good. Well, how do you do that in the world? What does that look like? Well, the first thing that Paul would say is be in submission to those who are in government. Chapter 13, verse 1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities. So essentially, what we talked about last week is why, and that's because politics is ministry. Okay? Politics is ministry, meaning that when we see ministry, we have this mindset that it's only for those who are pastors, it's only for those who are elders. But the reality is that anyone, remember, there are three institutions that God has set up for humanity to function, to live by. The very first institution was Genesis chapter 2, the family. A husband, a wife, producing children, and a bond of unity. The second institution that God set out was government. And that's in Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, where we have the death penalty introduced to humanity. And it is ran by officials. It is ran by politicians. And they are also ministers too. And then third, God has established a church, and this is in Acts chapter 2. Okay? So, and there's also leadership for within clergy too. So, essentially, politics is ministry, and submission to God is submission to the government. Submission to God is submission to the government. Now, many of us will say, "What about, 2020? Didn't churches, some of them, open and rebel against the government?" Yes. Whatever is consistent, as long as the government aligns itself with the things of God. If government aligns itself with the higher standards of God, then so can the church follow along. Remember, you ever wonder why say the soldiers in Nazi Germany, okay, when they were in court, you know what they said? They said we followed the highest level of authority in our land, in Germany. So in Germany, the soldiers, they followed the highest level of authority. What could we do? We'd be disobeying our government. Well, who is judging the German soldiers? Who is judging the Nazi soldiers? Well, it's the law above the law. You see that? Every single nation there's always a sense of some sense of a higher law, and that is God's law. It's what we call natural law. Okay, so again, there's the law, but there's a law above the God, and typically, I would say American politics, its ethics, its law, its legal system is based upon what I just said, the law above the law, the natural law of God. You ever think why theft is wrong, murder is wrong? Well, it's because again, there's a blueprint, there's an ethical system, and we get that from the scriptures, right? So essentially, to submit to God is to submit to the government, because if the government were to do its rightful diligence in following the moral law, it would be in consistency with God's law, right? So civil disobedience happens when people see a disconnect between the government and the higher law of God, right? So Acts chapter 4, Peter and John standing in front of the Sanhedrin, and they say, "Do not preach the gospel." Right? What does Peter and John say? They say, "We'd rather follow God rather than man." Why? Because the Sanhedrin's law for them, which was "do not preach the gospel," was contrary to the law of God. Okay, so it's an illustration of civil disobedience. Okay, now what is the rightful? What is the role, the duty of government? To uphold good, and to punish evil. Okay, to uphold good and to punish evil. And those who are living, who are the constituents living in that society, this is all Romans chapter 13, 1 to 7, has two mandates. First, pay taxes. Okay, pay taxes. And second, honor those who are in authority. Taxes, paying your taxes, honoring those who are in authority. Okay. Any questions from last week?
What if you live in China?
Well, there's something called, so in China, the CCP, Chinese Communist Party, there is a division between, so there's led by Xi Jinping, there's a state-run church, so a CCP church, but there's also the underground church of China. The CCP church would be considered for us woke, right? It would be really pushed, the understanding pushed from the government. But then you have the underground church. The underground church in China consists of 330 million people. That's the exact same number as the United States population. Okay, so essentially that's what Romans 13 would look like in China, the underground church. So most of the leadership in China are female, and we here in the West we have these theological debates as far as egalitarianism, complementarianism, should male lead, should women lead, and these discussions. There in China, it's predominantly led by women, and the reason why is because the men who were leading are now put in jail. So as a result, the next human has to step up. You see? So again, this is what civil disobedience looks like in China. Yeah. Is that any other feedback from that? No? All right. Let's all go to Romans chapter 13. Romans chapter 13. And we're going to look at verses 8 to 14. Romans chapter 8. And then we're going to look at verses 8 to 14. And I'm going to break this passage into two sections, okay? First is section 1 of verses 8 to 10. And in Romans 13, 8 to 10, Paul essentially talks about love being the fulfillment of the law. And the hearts of those who live in Rome as far as how they're to conduct themselves internally. And the second section is from verse 11 to 14. And from verse 11 to 14, Paul will talk about as far as how the perception, the view that we should live, say in Rome or in our time. Okay, how we conduct ourselves as citizens. Okay, can someone read verses 8 to 10 out loud? 8 to 10.
Pay all your debts except the debt of love for others. Never finish paying that. For if you love them, you will be obeying all of God's law, fulfilling all his requirements. If you love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, you will not want to harm or cheat him or kill him or steal from him. And you won't sin with his wife or want what is his or do anything else the Ten Commandments says is wrong. All 10 are wrapped up in this one, to love your neighbor as you love yourself. Love does no wrong to anyone. That's why it fully satisfies all of God's requirements. It is the only law that you need.
Wow.
That was Good News Bible, so it was a little different, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah. You can understand it better. I can.
It's okay. No, the meaning's there. The meaning's there. Remember, Bible translators, differ on two things. There's two main incentives that drive Bible translators. First is literalness, or woodenness, they call it. Wooden just means literal. So it's word for word. Okay, and those who translate like that, obviously, what's the value that what's the justification that they're doing that is biblical accuracy, right? They want to be faithful to the text. So it doesn't matter how it sounds, as long as the translation is word for word, they're good. The second camp, as far as Bible translators, and I would say that, what was that translation you read, Bonnie?
Good news.
Good news.
The good news.
So the other incentive would be meaning. Okay, so people that translate the Bible, that they understand that the words are necessary, but what's more important is the meaning behind it, and and it be communicated to those that listen. So sometimes words are very literal, but sometimes the meaning will get lost, because why? Because language changes, right? I would say in the last 10 years, like, you can talk like one of these like Gen Zers, like the way they talk, and it's only a language like in the last so years, and it's like I would not understand a word that they're saying, right? And they're speaking English, and the whole point of it is meaning. There's always words that change, but the meanings. So I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God. Romans 12, right? But the point of it, no one talks like that, right? No one talks. So let's take the meaning from it, right? I appeal to you, therefore, brothers. I urge you, therefore, brothers. See, the meaning's there, right? So who knows? In 5 years, there's going to be another word for appeal or beseech, or right? That's some young 20-year-old or 15-year-old is going to come up with a new word, and then we're right. That's just the way language works, etymology. So now here, in verse 8 to 10, Paul taught the first section. Remember, Paul talks about Paul talks about fulfilling the law through love. Okay, I want to read you just the verse 8. Owe no one anything except to loving one another, for the one who loves another fulfills the law. Now I want you here. This section right here. Remember, there's a transition that Paul is trying to communicate. That Paul is in the middle of. Remember I said when it came to 13:1 to 7. Remember, there's a transition from 12:21 where it says, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." Do not overcome evil, but overcome evil. And then he transitioned to chapter 13, verses 1 to 7, which talks about submission to the government. The same logic applies from verse 8 to 10. Now he's talking, remember we talked about taxes in verse 7. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom respect is owed. Okay, and then honor. Honor to whom honor is owed. And then he says, verse 8, owe no one anything except love to each other. So Paul is still in the mindset of, how do you be a good citizen of this world, or how do you overcome evil with good in society? Okay, how do you overcome evil with good? So at the end of the day, from verse 8 all the way to 14, this is what it means to be a good citizen. Okay, to be a good citizen in the land that you live in. So, for instance, that and to be a good citizen, that's how you truly overcome evil. Not one person, but a collective effort. Okay, for instance, Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah. We know the book of Jeremiah. He's writing this book, and he's writing it to the Israelites who were who were captive in Babylon. So he kind of prophesied about it, but he was alive during the time when it happened. So he's writing them while it's going on. And what he urges his people to do, what he urges the Israelites to do, is to build, is to live in society. I want to read Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 5 says, Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 5 to 7 says, build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons, and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city, he says, where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So essentially, notice how Jeremiah, how he's saying, build, get married, have kids, have lots of kids, and then make sure that those kids have other kids too, and vice versa, and on and on and on and on. And at the end of the day, this is what it means to be a good citizen, to live in it and to produce, to bring the shalom of God. Okay, so I really believe that. Let me let me take a step back and let me ask you guys: should Christians, should followers of God, be good citizens, and not just good citizens, but I would say the best citizens in a nation? Would you say so?
Should be, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that Christians should be outstanding citizens in any nation that they're a part of, right? And I think it's a good thing when Christian nations, they thrive, they flourish, and I think it's a good thing. Okay, now, typically, one of the things that we do as Christians in response to this, and this is kind of what Jeremiah was getting at, was that we either, as far as when we're in a society, we'll either isolate. So back then, what was common was that if they would always go into ghettos. Okay, the Jewish people would always go into one area, and that's where we, the term ghetto, it came from that, right? Jews always coming together, and it was a practice, right? And no, get out, be one with society too. Okay, a second pitfall that a lot of Christians have, other than isolation and being in ghettos, and what I mean isolation is like the Amish, the Mennonites. I appreciate, I love what they do, but what I'm saying is there's a lack of witness. There's a lack of there's a lack of direct influence as far as evangelism, right? I don't know if we're called to just be behind our own walls, right? And I would say I would say I'm a little sympathetic. Would you guys be sympathetic? I would say in the last 5 years, a lot of people have been thinking like this, like the whole isolationist mindset. Like people fleeing California, going to conservative states, Idaho, Florida, Tennessee. But it's the mindset, right? We don't want to be in this area. Can't raise our kids here, so we gotta, in a better area. I understood. So, it's just to what extent do we take this moving out to raise godly kids? All for it. It's just, again, to what extent where we don't communicate with the world, we don't communicate with anyone, right? And then again, at the end of the day, are we doing what Christ said? Is that we're taking the lantern, we're kind of hiding it. Okay, that's an extreme. Another extreme is we, instead of isolating ourselves, we conform. We compromise our own beliefs in order to fit in, right? And this is what, if you've read the book of Daniel, if you've read the book of Esther, that's the one thing that you always see is the nation of Israelites always trying to conform to their external surroundings. And this is where God is always saying, no, you need to be holy. Holy meaning being set apart. Okay? So, any questions this far? No? All right. Well, question is, how do you live? How do you live as good citizens in a society? First, he talks about love fulfills the law by paying our obligation to our neighbor in verse 8. Okay, love fulfills So notice how he says, "Owe no one anything, except except to love each other." So think of this. The logic that Paul has here, where he says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another. For the one who loves has fulfilled the law." Okay. Now, here, essentially, to pay your taxes. Again, this is what he says in verse 7. For you to pay your taxes, you're being a good citizen. You're being a good citizen. When you don't pay taxes, or how about this? Have you ever loaned someone money before? Maybe like $10, $50, or you've given money out and they'll say, "I'll pay you back," right?
Yeah.
I think we've all been there. Imagine the person's in your presence and they're not paying you back. On top of
Been
that,
there.
on top of that, you know that they have the money. How will you feel?
Used.
Used? What else?
Um,
Disrespected.
angry.
Disrespected. Well, if you feel the number one way you can make a person angry, just disrespect them, belittle them, because you're really touching their soul, and you're arguing the opposite of what it was created to be, and that's to be honored, to be respected. So it goes against our nature. That's why there's an immediate anger that comes out of us, a defensiveness, right? All of us deserve respect. All of us deserve dignity. But when someone doesn't pay you back, guess what? That's disrespectful, right? So at the end of the day, to be a good citizen, you have to pay your taxes. It's respectful. Okay. Now the thing is this: all of us are all of us are in some sense of debt right now. And you know what the debt? And here's the logic that Paul is using when he talks about owning, and that is this: you might not be in financial debt. Okay, and Paul is not saying is any debt is bad debt, meaning that look at rent, look at mortgages. They're all you owe, right? You ever go to Marina Del Rey or Newport Beach and see all those yachts, right? Or Long Beach, you see all these big yachts, and you're like, wow, or giant houses, and you marvel. But at the same time, a question comes to the back of my head, and I say, I wonder how much debt is in this property as far as ownership, right? And what Paul is saying is this: when it comes to debt, financial debt, pay it off, okay? But there's a debt that we always have to pay off. Because, for instance, is anyone here not in financial debt? Hands up. I can't see anyone, but is anyone not in debt, financial debt? Like you don't have to owe a big chunk of money to anyone. Just you're free, right? That could be a state of yours, but the reality is this: you are in some sense of a debt. You're always in debt, and here's the debt that Paul is talking about. The debt that you are in is that of love. You're in love debt, and the love debt that Paul is talking about is towards each other. So as long as someone is a Christian, there's a love that you are to give to them, vice versa. That's the very essence of what he's saying. That debt cannot be paid off. It's continual. It's continual throughout humanity. Okay? And notice the logic, though. No, when you don't pay debt off, guess what? Disrespect, anger. But when you pay it off, respect, honor, dignity. The exact same thing when it comes to loving our brothers and sisters in Christ. There's a sense of honor. Okay? And now you're living within the created order that God has established for all of us. Okay? So, he talks about as far as how to live. Love fulfills the law by paying our obligation to our neighbor, which is to love them. Okay? He also says in verse 9, he says, for the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so essentially, all the commandments of God. So, in the Old Testament, the 613 commandments, all in the Old Testament, can be summed up into two: love the Lord your God with a heart, soul, mind, and strength, and what? Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the commands, if you think of it, it's always your heart, how it's perceived, how it should function towards God, how it should and how it shouldn't. Also, a big portion of the Old Testament is how to live with each other. And we've talked, I think it was 2 weeks ago, we've talked about this, is how do you know someone's heart with God? It's how they treat people. Not treat people that they like, not treat people when things are good, it's the bad. You know when you're frustrated, you know when something's got you. How do you respond? What goes in your mind? How do you act? This is where the rubber hits the road, right? When you're put in a very uncomfortable situation with a person, okay, and how do you do? How well do you do? Okay, that shows where someone stands with God. Okay, now notice the commands that he's given. What does he say? The commands? He says, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. What are all these commands? What are they in reference to? You shall not commit adultery against God.
The Ten Commandments.
It's Exodus 20, 10 Commandments. You shall not murder God.
Against others.
Against others. You see that this is people focused here. So Matthew or Exodus chapter 20, Leviticus chapter 19 reference loving your neighbor as yourself. Okay, so think of it this way, as far as guidelines. When we view commands like this, do not covet, etc., we view them as guidelines. Think of them as love lines. Okay, think of them as love lines in the sense of this is how it should be. Not the covetous part, but when you don't covet, that's how it should be. When you don't lie, that's how it should be. When you don't murder, that's how it should be. Right? Humanity is violated, and as a result, we step into that violated order. Okay? But at the end of the day, these commandments are there to protect us. So instead of guidelines, they're love lines. Okay? Think of them as the paint on a highway, say on the 405 or the 5. They're there to protect you from other people and vice versa. Okay? Because people kill each other. But these laws are lines for us to, as a human race, live in civility with. Okay? So when you read the commandments, are they more rule-based to you or an expression of love? How do you perceive them?
Probably an expression of love
Yeah.
and to stay away from all evil.
Yeah. How many of you guys, maybe the laws were more like prohibitions to you? So if you committed them, it's like guilt, shame, lightning bolt from the sky.
I think I have thought of them as rules
Yeah.
to follow.
No, I remember
Yeah.
me too, growing up.
Yeah, like law.
What's that?
Law.
But it's more honest if it's not just
Like
rules.
law.
It's something that's inside of you that comes out
Yeah.
because the evil is not there.
Yep. Yep. And we've chatted about this before, like, Exodus 20. This is the first time you see the laws, but if you think of the Bible, if you think of the scriptures, like the laws were, moral accountability was there way before the laws were even given, right? And the implication is the law is in our heart. So if it says thou shalt not murder, well, that's in Exodus 20. The first murder was in Genesis chapter 4 with what? Cain killing Abel, and he was held accountable for his murder, killing his own brother, right? So it's at the end of the day, it's more accountability. but it's for us to protect each other from one another, to live in civility, right? So
Some of them are rules. I guess they're all rules, but some of them I would never say murder or steal. I don't think of them rules I have to follow because I would never think of breaking it.
Yeah.
well
I would never think about murdering somebody.
Well, here's where I think Exodus 20 is helpful in what you're saying. Is, remember I was saying before Exodus 20, like there's Abraham lied, right? Cain killed, Moses killed, the midwives in Exodus 1 lied, right? They said, "Oh yeah, the Hebrew wives, the women, they just give birth so fast." No, they kept the sons alive. They lied. Now I'm just thinking of passages where there's a sense of moral accountability. Joseph, remember in Potiphar's wife when he ran away? He ran away from sexual morality. Why? Well, what's wrong with that, right? So this is all internal, right? As far as moral account, when Exodus 20 comes in, and all of a sudden you actually have it on stone. I think how it could help us practically is the heart. And what I mean by that, this is more in the New Testament, is, you're saying like, I'll never murder anyone. What was the other one, Trish?
I think I said lie or steal.
Lie or steal.
Steal.
Um,
Lie. I think everybody sometimes lies. Sometimes maybe it's for a good reason. I don't know.
yeah,
But stealing. I mean, I don't think of it. If I stole something, I would know it was wrong when I was doing it.
Yeah. I sympathize with you actually on the stealing one. I don't, but here's what I was going to say is the murder one. And what I mean by that is if you were ever angry in your heart towards someone, what does Jesus say? You've already committed murder. Right? So technically, all of us have committed murder. Right? So there's a heart behind every commandment. Remember, so the Old Testament was the commands, external, but then the New Testament is the heart behind the command, the heart behind the law. So it's as if at that point we're all guilty. Yeah, we're all guilty there. Okay. Hi, Danny.
Hey.
Hey, Jerry.
Oh.
Sorry we're late, man.
Okay, we are late. All right.
Are you? I got back from Lake Tahoe, so and the storm snowed in, man. So
I got you. Hi, Regan.
Hi. Good to see you. It's been a while, huh?
I know. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Oh, say hi to everyone.
Hi, gang. Hi, everybody. I do. I know Virginia.
They're at the church. Virginia and Bonnie and Trish.
I don't see Bonnie's name on there.
Oh, they're all together at the church.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we're on Romans 13, 8 to 14. And we're just finishing up verse 10. Yeah, so what we're talking about is being good citizens in a society, and essentially living, love being the expression of the law. So all this, loving your neighbor as yourself. Think of this. So have you guys ever heard of another interpretation of Matthew 22:37-39? So love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So me, I hear two commands: love God, love people. Does anyone hear that too? That when you hear that, so Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Now, there's another interpretation with that passage, and the way people would interpret that is love God
And love yourself.
love people, love yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Because it says love your neighbor. What?
Yeah.
as yourself. So some people say it's a command,
Yeah.
right?
I don't think.
I don't. Yeah, I don't think. I think it's something. It's the do unto others. The heart
Right.
behind it, the very heart behind it, in the sense of, hey, when you're dehydrated, what do? You drink
Drink
water.
water.
If you're hungry, what do? You
Eat food.
eat food. If you're tired, what do? You take it. That same reaction, that desire towards other people. And imagine we lived in a society like that. Imagine we had people that had that mentality, right? I think that's so. It goes down to two: love God and love people. Okay?
Ruben,
Yeah.
can I share something?
Yeah, Nate.
I was just gonna say when Jesus was quoting that, he was quoting Deuteronomy 6:4, and then which is love the Lord your God, with all your heart, mind, and soul. And then he was quoting love your neighbor as yourself is Leviticus 19:18.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was, he was quoting those.
Yeah. So
I feel like, I always grew up thinking, that Jesus, like, that was something new. But I realized that he's quoting the Torah. He's quoting the law.
yes. So Deuteronomy 6:4 is known as is the Shema, and this is known as like the declaration of like the oneness of God to a Jew. So for us, it'd be like Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. Or to a Muslim, it'd be the Shahada, right? La ilaha Allah, Muhammadat Rasulullah Allah. There is only one God, and Muhammad is his final prophet, right? There's always a declaration that we have. So to a Jew, right? I don't know if you've ever seen a conversion of Jake Paul, and Nate, we were talking about Jake Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, he became a Jew a month ago. So if you see their conversions, they have the tefillin. They have the tefillin, the brown, the black leather that goes around them, and it's all from Deuteronomy 6:4, right? And then they put the box of scripture on their forehead, and they tie it up here, and they just cite scriptures, right? And if in these little boxes, a rabbi would write a specific verse in Hebrew, very, very, very small. But anyway, that's some background. And Leviticus 19 is I was going to ask someone to read it, but just because of time, we can't. But I was going to ask someone to read. But Leviticus 19 is specifically about loving your neighbor as yourself in the context of a foreigner, right? So,
Yeah.
You just have to, go back and read it. But that's just the context of the two. But you're right. Jesus, he's not quoting Exodus 20. He's quoting Leviticus 19 and Deuteronomy 6. No, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the one thing I just wanted to say about the Ten Commandments, I think the first four essentially like how we love God, and then the last six are like how we love others.
Generally, it's seen that way. So 10 Commandments,
Something
first
like
four,
that.
all related to God. Last six would be people based. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and I think the six, they're all duty. They're all duties. So murder, committing adultery, except for covetousness. Covetousness is one of the heart. So the covetousness is the only like New Testament law, if you want to say, where it's not mentioned in an act. It's mentioning an incentive. So
It's a more heart condition.
Exactly, heart condition. So when we get away from, disobedience, is we're passive. That's the Jewish mentality, right? I didn't lust. It's like, right? Did you look? What was your heart saying? Right, and that's the sin part right there, right? So, yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Let's go to verse 11 to 14. 11 to 14. So Romans 13, 11 to 14. Can someone read that out loud?
Besides this, you know the time that the hour has come for you to wake from sleep. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. Through 12? The night?
14 to 14.
Okay, through 14, excuse me. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on armor of light. Let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immortality or morality, excuse me, mortality. And not the quarreling and jealousy. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires.
So here, Paul now is talking about living as citizens in a. So before it from verse 8 to 10, talking about love being the fulfillment of the law, right? If you think of the law, love is the heart. The law would be more how it's displayed, how it's lived out. How do you know someone truly loves? Well, obedience. How do you know someone doesn't love? Disobedience. Very simple, right? Here now he switches as far as vision, perspective. Verse 11, besides this, you know the time that the hour has come for you to awake from sleep, for salvation is nearer to us now than we first believed. Okay, so I don't know if you knew, it was this is called, so notice how he says that the hour has come for you to awake from your sleep, for salvation is near. In the first century, I don't know if you knew, but the apostles, they thought the return of Christ was in their lifetime. It was called. This is called in the academic world the day of parousia. So when they were writing, with the anticipation that Christ would come back in their lifetime. Right. This is what they're saying. Be prepared for that hour. So where he says, for salvation is nearer to us now than it was when you first believed. So why does he say salvation is nearer? Verse 11. Salvation is nearer.
It was Jesus. What?
I'm trying not.
Say again?
Sorry.
Shh, glasses.
Yeah.
Salvation. This is after.
We're gonna have a talk with potential detention guys. But salvation being nearer. Salvation being near. Well, when we think of salvation, and I would say a lot of this is semantics. I'm just being 100% honest, and you hear me say this a lot. But when I say semantics, I mean like you can believe in something, but you just word it differently. You describe it differently, but you're talking about the same thing. And what I mean by that is that salvation, biblically, is past, present, future.
Right. I was just going to say that too.
And the reason why I say semantics is because if you don't know, there's a huge dispute in Roman Catholicism and the Protestant evangelicalism, or But what I mean, and it's in reference to salvation. This would be like the big, out of all. Like there's many disputes, but I would say like this would be a big one. But if you really analyze what they mean or what everyone means, it's like I think we're all saying the same thing. We're just wording it differently. And what I mean by that, say for example, Romans 5:1. Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. So there's a justification. So Justification is the moment you're saved. I believe in Jesus. Is that now a Protestant will say that's the moment of salvation, okay? And then after that moment, there's something called sanctification. You grow. There's trial and error. You get tested. You fall. You get tested again. You succeed. You conform into the person of Christ, and we call that sanctification. Now, a Catholic would say this is all justification or all salvation, right? So essentially, they don't use the sanctification terminology. They just say it's all justification. But my point is we're all saying the same thing, meaning that there's a moment that you're saved and there's a moment after where you progress, practically speaking. Practically. Okay? So when I say that salvation is past, present, future, where he says salvation is near, think of it like this. In Ephesians 2, there was a time where Paul talked about salvation, Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, but it was past tense. Salvation's past tense, so salvation is near. So think of it this way. We were saved. We are being saved.
We will be saved.
We will be saved.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's and really the real completion of salvation. Like right now, guess what? Right now all of us are saved if you believe. But I wouldn't say you're living to the fullness of your salvation. You know why? Because you're alive. You're alive. Right? We have these issues with this world, with this flesh and all that. But what I'm saying is I think true salvation is a new creation. So when you're reading Revelation chapter 20, that's the culmination. Like that is it right there. So technically speaking, we're saved, but we're in this process of dying to the flesh. We're in this process of dealing with everyone else's flesh, dealing with everyone else's imperfection, right? So again, this is pretty much the justification or the reason why Paul is saying salvation is near. Okay.
Well, it's like he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it in you. So it's looking at it as a process. Just like you said, we have been saved, we are saved, and we will be saved. That's all present in the scriptures, the New Testament scriptures. So, yeah. And every day we're closer, one way or another, hopefully, so why you're nearer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like
that makes sense to me.
Even a timing, like if you think of it, we're closer to salvation. When I say salvation, remember I said the new creation, like that's it. We're all gone. Christ has come back. We're closer to salvation than those 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, just because of time. And those, if we're all gone, and those who are alive 100 years from now, then they're closer than our generation was. Just basic math, right? Any questions?
But Ruben, I have a question. Yeah.
Yep.
So when you say that, do you see that also not just in a time of history, span of history, but in one's own life?
Yeah.
I mean, as you're growing and living, you're going to be closer. It seems to me like in respect to this, although I understand what you're saying as far as anyway.
All of us are closer to salvation today than we were a month ago.
Right.
All of us, and you know your own journey. All of us knows. We all know our personal journey, meaning our walk in life. You're closer to salvation today than you were during your darkest moments of life, where you thought you couldn't get by it, where you questioned your salvation, where you questioned your heart, where you thought like you felt like giving up, right? And you got by. And again, we're closer practically, all of us. Okay? And this is why he says, hence, wake up. Okay? Wake up. For salvation is nearer to us now than when we first believed. Verse 12. Then
Ruben.
that, Nate? Hello? Oh.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Nate.
I was just going to ask about, is that Philippians where it says work out your salvation with fear and trembling.
Philippians 2. Yeah.
God is at work in you.
He's sort of like saying demonstrate.
I think you're breaking up, Nate.
Okay, sorry.
No. But what was the question?
Passage.
Say that one more time. One more time, Nate.
No, I was just asking about the Philippians passage, what that means to work out our salvation. Is that like through demonstration, like demonstrating what we believe?
Oh man. So this is Philippians 2. I believe it's 10, 11, 12 around there. But essentially, think of it, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for what? It is God working in you. Okay, so that passage could be in many. So first, there's you could look at that passage as far as working out your salvation, just very similar to what we're saying. So you're already saved, but it's that process of sanctification, right? You could look at it like that. But you also get into the part of for it's God working in you to complete it. So is it you or is it God? Work out. So Paul says, work out your salvation. That's to you, right? But it's God working in you. So is it you or is it God? And this is where people like John Piper, Tim Keller, it's known as compatibilism, meaning that it's possible for God to work inside of a person, and it's possible for someone within their own libertarian free will to choose to live it out, to practically work on their salvation. So don't think of it as when I'm working on my salvation, I am responsible. I am saving me. My works are saving me. No, we all recognize that it's 100% Christ. It's just it's more practical. Okay, when it's saying work out, meaning live it out, right?
Yeah.
Live it out. Yeah. So
practice what you preach, essentially.
So this is where this passage is where Catholics combat Protestants on, and this is it's just semantics. Exactly what I'm saying. How about this? Work out your sanctification with fear and trembling. For it is God. If I said that, it'd be like, oh, it's consistent with my theology. It goes back to what I'm saying. So a Catholic would say, salvation it's the moment I got saved, but it was the moment after, where I had to practice things. Versus a Protestant would say, it's the moment I got saved, justification, I had to practice things, sanctification.
Ruben, can I read the today's living? It says, work hard to show the results of your salvation. And I know it's sometimes loose, but I mean, that makes sense. Obeying God with deep reverence and fear, for God is working in you, giving you the desire and the power to do what pleases Him. So obviously, the way that that's stated to me is at least maybe clearer. Well, it may not be entirely, the most accurate translation. Work out show the results of your salvation, obeying God with deep fear and reverence. Yeah. And God's in the process. He's at work in you, both to will and to work for His good purpose in your lives.
So, but you see that, like it's the results. That's sanctification.
It's like bearing fruit.
Exactly.
In a way.
Exactly. So think of Galatians. Right? You always want to ask that. Like, fruit is the ultimate marker of a true Christian. Okay, fruit meaning their life. Okay, and that progress, right? Because you'll see a lot of hiccups in people's lives. It's always interesting seeing someone deal with something for so long, and they work on it, and all of a sudden you see a sense of liberty that they experience. That is fruit. That is fruit. When someone has been an addict, say for 5 years on some, and you can see the struggle, that 5-year struggle that they had, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a sense of, wow, they broke free from that. It was God working in them, but it was them at the same time. So that would be like that, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Yeah.
Mhm.
I use
Cool, thanks.
I use like addiction or what it is just more of a concrete example for us the way we see things
Right.
in our culture. So um, we're almost at the time right now. Can someone read verse 12 to 14? Oh no, we already read that. I apologize. I apologize. So Paul continues. The night is far gone, the day is at hand. So then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us what? Cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. This is a very New Testament theme in the Bible as far as putting off and putting on, putting off and putting on. And again, this is practically what it looks like to work out your salvation or show the fruits, the results of your salvation, is putting off and putting on, dying and coming to life. Okay, so when he says, what do you say? Cast off the works of darkness. Okay, so in Christ we're called to put off the old self. Colossians 3 verse 9. I don't know if we have time to read that. Colossians 3 verse 9. Maybe can someone read that out loud? And can someone read Ephesians 4:22? We're instructed to put off the old self.
Ephesians 4:22, you said?
Ephesians 4:22. And someone read Colossians 3:9.
Yeah. I got Ephesians 4:22. And it is, it's kind of part B, but throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. And then the next verse is, instead let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. And so it's put on your new nature. So.
Colossians 3:9. Someone read.
Do not lie to one another, since laid aside the old self with its evil practices.
Okay. So again, especially in Ephesians and Colossians, they're very parallel. But Paul has these sections where he's like, put off, and then put on. There's always a replacement. Okay, and obviously this comes in where you're self-aware, you're conscientious that you have sin struggles, and saying, I do not want to do this, put on. Okay? He continues in the second part of, so then let us cast off the works of darkness and put on what? Put on the armor of light.
Mm-hmm.
Put on the armor of light. So Galatians 3:27, Paul talks about putting on Christ, putting on the new self. Colossians 3:10. Ephesians 4:24, Paul also says, put on the new self. Okay, so put off, put on, put off, put on, he says. Okay, verse 13. So put off, put on. Let us walk properly, as in the daylight, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual morality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy. Okay, so Paul here is now talking about living properly. Remember, he's talking about living as good citizens, following chapter 13, verse 1 to 7, right? As far as living, being submissive to the government. Now we're talking about living here, and he says, let us walk properly in the daytime. So essentially, live in the light. Okay, notice the actions he said. Not in orgies, not in drunkenness, not in sexual morality. These are things you do at night. These are things you do when no one's looking. Why? Because they're shameful, right? That's why he says, let us walk as in what? Daytime. Okay, there's exposure when you have the light. Okay, so I think we can say that the sins in verse 13 imply shame, right? Their actions done at night and away from the general public. Okay, and then verse 14.
True.
And by the way, verse 13, like this is more prominent in our generation, if anything. right? I think we're seeing. Remember, I'm saying like it's shameful. I think we're seeing a lot of these things, but now in the public, now in social media, now on the screen, it's like we're. I think we need to see a renaissance of shame. When I say a renaissance sense of shame, I mean using shame for actions that are appropriate. You see that? Taking like no, there's certain actions like you look at that, you're like this is utterly shameful, but they don't. No one's acting like it, right? But I think there needs to be a resurgence in that area in our society. So I would say in the last 5 years, I think morally in the West things have significantly declined. The last 5 years, and again, these are shameful acts, but they're presented as if who cares? They're now made a norm. Okay, so anyways, I can break down to you like culturally like what I'm talking about, but I'll go on forever. But at the end of the day, like this is human nature, right? And you go back to why this is. Well, who's responsible for that? Well, you look at government. What's the role of government? Uplift the good, discourage and punish evil. Now it's vice versa. Things that are evil are now honored. Things that are now honorable are now made disgraceful.
That's right.
Right? So someone that is I've note that would be considered shameful or very repulsive is now a pop star. Is now front page of Time magazine or something like that. Right? So
Correct.
markets, right? We're there because that was the market in the last 10 years, and hoping in the year 2025 moving forward, things change, right? We want, like, think of the 1950s where Billy Graham, he would sell out these, like, his crusades, right? Like, night after night, Richard Nixon would go up and talk, and, like, that's amazing. But how is it possible in the 1950s that's possible? Well, there was a market for it. Now people want to see Taylor Swift. Markets have changed. Why? Hearts have changed. See that? What the human heart does as a society. Okay. Verse 14. We got to close here. Okay, because we're just over an hour. But put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. Make no provision for the flesh, essentially. So put on Christ. Okay? Notice how he says this, and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. Remember this. Whatever you feed grows. Okay? Whatever you feed grows. Actions that happen, when you see someone do something, the reason why they did that, because it was already the desire was already in them. It was in them. So as a result, they never dealt with that desire, which is why the action happened, which is why the behavior happened. So when you see a scandal of a pastor and say, "Oh my, I've been listening to 40 years or 30 years," or you honored him, you respected him, and all of a sudden some scandal comes out, you ask yourself, how? Why? Well, let me tell you why through this passage right here, is they never put that to death. It was on them. That desire lingered inside of their heart. They probably flicked it. They probably starved it for a day. And they justify, I'm victorious. I killed it. Well, those actions showed that they have not killed it. Okay? So when you hear these things, like a famous preacher who for 5 years they were having, well, guess what? Through the 5 years, they were talking about God. But what was in their heart, they were gratifying the desires of the flesh. It was never put to death. They never dealt with it. If they dealt with it, it would not have happened in the real world. That's just the way sin works. Okay? So, I don't know if you know St. Augustine. St. Augustine, he wrote the book, The Confessions. And this passage was the passage that really changed his life. So St. Augustine, he was a sex addict. And I think when he was 15 to when he was 31 or 32, he had sex every day with his concubine. Every day. For a good 16 years. And he could not stop. He's like, how do I stop this? and he was reading Romans chapter 13, verse 14, that completely changed his life. And he learned this concept of death, of how the internal man changes, what leads to behaviors, leads to facial expressions, leads to specific actions. Okay? So remember, whatever you feed grows.
And his mom was praying for him all the time. That helped because his mom was a devout Christian. Yeah.
His mom that he was running away from for his whole
Yeah.
life.
Correct.
If you know, he went on a boat, and I think he
left her
he
behind.
left her behind and just went to Rome. So yeah,
Bye, Mom.
How many concubines?
just one.
Oh, one.
Uh-huh. And he has one son, Deodatus. So now notice this though: the word addiction, like Saint Augustine would be considered an addict in our time, but he never said, "Oh, I'm an addict." Or you look at the Bible, there's no, "Oh, I'm an addict," right? There's no word for addict. The reason why is, remember, it's etymology, but essentially an addict is I think we're all addicts, and I think we're all born addicts. I think by nature, ontologically, we're all addicts. And what I mean by that, an addict is someone where they have no control of themselves. It's at the root of it, meaning that there's something outside of them that is master over them. So anything, it says, "Hey, I'm here," you follow it. You can't say no to it. Okay? The essence of freedom is you can look at it in the eye and say, "No." That's freedom. Right? Bondage, addiction, is where it has power over you. I'm not saying you're... there could be fights and struggles, but what I'm saying is where there's a constant, you're losing all the time to this one thing, that's addiction. So you're a slave to it. Okay? A person that's truly free, they've dealt with it, right? And they've exactly what we're talking about. Whatever you feed grows. Whatever you kill, remember, there's a liberty that happens. And the true essence of this Christian faith is internal death. Learning this art of dying to the things that are inside of your heart, bringing freedom. Remember that the person that's truly free is the person that anything that's outside of them externally has no power over them. And what happens in their heart is they've truly made Christ as Lord. Practically speaking, that's the true free person. So a person can be a multi-billionaire, but be an utter slave. An utter slave to women, to the drink, to whatever it is, right? Versus a person that has nothing, but in their heart, outside of them, there's nothing that controls them other than God. That is a true free person right there. Okay? And it's a lifelong process to that point. This is what we're talking about. Sanctification. Putting off, putting on. Putting off, putting on. That's all of us. So technically, like we've done that as a society. And I understand practically. You know, we have AA, NA, Gambling Anonymous. We make these groups, and all of a sudden when someone goes to them, it's like, oh, that's an addict right there. That person, that's an addict. And guess what, by implication, I'm saying? They're an addict and I'm not. Because I don't go there. But all of us are addicts. If you think of the biblical understanding of it, meaning bondage, right? That's the essence of being an addict. Okay? But freedom happens when you die to it. And it's a gradual process. Okay? Make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. Okay? Anyways, we're going to close here because we're a little over time. But living as a good citizens, essentially what Paul is saying here from verse 8 to 14, living as good citizens, essentially, is loving those who are around you well, because it's a true fulfillment of the law, and also having a vision of Christ. Remember, his return. This is why they're saying salvation is coming nearer. So essentially, there's an urgency that the apostles had as far as the return of Christ. Like I think when it comes, like if you hear me talk, I think you'll know that I'm not the biggest like eschatology person. What I mean by that, some people, it's like eschatology, the return of Christ. There's that date, this date, that passage. I'm more, he'll come. I know that, but I think with all of us, there should be an urgency for that. We can disagree as far as the itty bitty, nuances of eschatology and amillennialism, post, whatever, all that. But I think just the general return of Christ, I think, should change our behavior, change our heart, change our perspective, right? This, and I think the older you get, you'll learn in the sense of this is not all that there is. The things that you pursue in life, the things that you've always wanted, when you have them, we're like, it's not that big, and God is life. God always teaches that at the end of the day, there's only one. He has given us what is truly valuable, right? God, family, church. These are the people. And you go back to God and people every single time, because these are the things that truly matter, right?
Well, thinking Jesus is going to come next week makes you want to be more current.
What's
I
that?
mean, you want to stay current.
Yeah.
You want to stay close to the Lord and practice and good works and prayer and study it. I mean, if you think he's coming next week, wouldn't you think?
If a question for all of us, if that were to happen, if you knew the day, say next week, Jesus coming back next Wednesday. No, let's say Friday, because we have to hear Nate speak next Thursday. So Friday, if Jesus were coming back Friday, would your behavior change? Would your mind change? Would you think differently? Would your priorities all of a sudden shift in an instant? Right? Rhetorical question. I know the answer. We'd all change. Right? So, that's the mindset. That's the mindset of what Paul wants. Okay?